fight to win.
We are killing terrorists.
President Trump unveils his strategy for Afghanistan. We have reaction in Washington and around the world. Dramatic rescue. 7-month-old baby boy is pulled out of the debris after an earthquake in Italy. As crews continue to search for more survivors. Sounding the alarm. An archbishop in the Philippines is hoping bells will inspire citizens to stand up against the president's bloody crackdown. And Vatican official in Russia. A report from Rome on the possibility that Pope Francis will visit Moscow. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, August 22nd, 2017. President Trump departs Washington, D.C. and heads to Arizona, where he'll rally thousands of supporters during a Make America Great Again event. Thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. The president will also visit the southern border and speak to veterans in Reno, Nevada. It comes a day after his nationwide address about his plans for Afghanistan, declaring U.S. troops must fight to win. We have team coverage tonight as the president recommits to the 16-year-old war in Afghanistan. Jason Calvi will bring us reaction from the Capitol. Wyatt Goolsby will tell us how the world is reacting, but we begin at the White House with correspondent Mark Irons. This is a reversal of his past calls for a speedy exit, isn't it?
That's right, Lauren. Last night he mentioned his original instinct was to pull out of Afghanistan, but he says becoming president has changed his viewpoint. He did not disclose too much information about the strategy, saying to publicize details would be counterproductive. He said micromanagement from Washington, D.C. does not win battles, and he's giving more authority to his military commanders to make decisions.
President Trump is vowing to win America's longest war.
Our troops will fight to win. We will fight to win.
In a 26-minute primetime speech, the president unveiled his new strategy in Afghanistan.
Victory will have a clear definition: attacking our enemies, obliterating ISIS, crushing al-Qaeda, preventing the Taliban from taking over Afghanistan, and stopping mass terror attacks against America before they emerge.
The president says the U.S. will shift away from a time-based approach and instead focus on results and cooperation with the Afghan government. He insists it will be a regional strategy.
Our commitment is not unlimited, and our support is not a blank check.
But the president offered few details about how progress would be measured, and he did not address the number of troops being deployed or how his approach differs from that of his predecessors. Still, the president is garnering praise. Some military experts say Trump is smart to give authority to U.S. forces on the ground.
He's not trained in military science. That was one of the weaknesses of the Obama administration, is that they put very tight restrictions on not only how many troops, but where the troops could go, how close they could get to the front. This is a matter of national security and self-defense.
Today we are learning more details about the president's strategy. That could involve sending up to 3,900 additional U.S. troops, according to senior officials. Lauren?
When can we expect those troops to start deploying?
The top U.S. commander for the Middle East says the first new forces will arrive in Afghanistan within days or weeks. They will include a combination of trainers, security forces, and other support troops.
Days. Wow. Thank you so much, correspondent Mark Irons at the White House. Top lawmakers join the debate over the president's Afghanistan proposal, and some slam it for being vague. Others say the message was long overdue. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi brings us that congressional reaction. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. Speaker Paul Ryan praises the new military strategy, calling it the new Trump doctrine. He says he's glad the president took the many months to come up with a long-term plan instead of a year-by-year approach. Ryan says the aim of all of this is to keep all of us safe.
We cannot allow another safe haven for terrorists to materialize again.
Speaker Paul Ryan says President Trump's strategy protects America and its interests.
I think it's important when it comes to our blood and our treasure and our soldiers and our safety that we actually have a comprehensive doctrine that we apply.
Senator John McCain also praises the president. He's been critical of Trump in the past, but when it comes to Afghanistan, McCain says the president took a big step in the right direction. He writes, "The president is now moving us well beyond the prior administration's failed strategy of merely postponing defeat." But the top Democrat on the Armed Services Committee, Senator Jack Reed, says the president was vague and short on the details our troops and the American people deserve. Republican Senator Rand Paul goes further, saying the Afghanistan mission has lost its purpose. He opposes sending more American troops to the country. Republican Governor John Kasich agrees, saying 16 years and more than 2,000 American lives lost are enough. He writes, America cannot afford to make an open-ended commitment of further lives and treasure to the improbable proposition of building a cohesive nation in Afghanistan. But Speaker Ryan defends Trump's strategy. He criticizes the Bush and Obama administrations for not having a longer-term plan.
We should have a conditions-based strategy, not a timetable-based strategy. I think that defeats the purpose, having had a timetable strategy. I think it telegraphs to our enemies, wait us out.
A Senate committee will get right to work reviewing this new Afghan strategy when they return from their August break next month. This current war in Afghanistan rests on the congressional authorization given after 9/11. Senator Rand Paul wants to pull the plug on that and force Congress to vote on the presidential power to wage this war. Lauren?
Do lawmakers want war?
Well, Senator John McCain says that this is needed. He's praising the president. We've also seen other lawmakers here on the Hill saying it's time to back out of Afghanistan, as you heard there from Senator Rand Paul. Now, Senator McCain does have some advice for President Trump. He says the president really needs to start acting as a wartime commander-in-chief. He needs to speak regularly to the American people, telling them why we're waging this war and why the sacrifice is worth it.
Correspondent Jason Calvi at the Capitol. Thank you, Jason. President Trump's speech is drawing mixed reaction from around the world. Close allies hope his new strategy will be a turning point in the war. Others say Trump's tough talk will have negative consequences. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee joins us from the State Department, where Secretary Rex Tillerson just wrapped up a press conference. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Secretary Tillerson is striking a much more diplomatic tone today. He says the United States will look to the international community, particularly Afghanistan's neighbors like Pakistan, to support the peace process. It's a contrast to President Trump's tone, who accused Pakistan and went hard on them of giving extremists a safe haven.
Pakistan must adopt a different approach, and we are ready to work with them to help them protect themselves against these terrorist organizations, but certainly to begin to end their attacks that are disrupting our efforts at peace.
Secretary of State Rex Tillerson today telling the press Pakistan can be an important partner in working towards peace and stability. Others in the Trump administration, like UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, echo the president's message.
This is not just about Afghanistan. This is about the region. And so that means that we've got to put the pressure on Pakistan. They can't safe harbor terrorists anymore.
Many Afghans are welcoming the president's shift in strategy, including the war-torn country's second most powerful official.
Our message as Afghans to our neighboring countries has been that our hands of friendship is extended.
But not everyone agrees. Analysts in Pakistan warn that isolating Islamabad could increase the influence of Russia, China, and even Iran.
Whether this is the war strategy or the negotiation, Pakistan cannot be ignored. And if they think the one nation can do it only while threatening them and pressurizing them, I think this is not going to be work.
China, for its part, is defending Pakistan. The two countries have close economic, political, and security ties dating back decades, based partially on their shared distrust of India. The Taliban is vowing to continue the fight while U.S. forces remain in the country. They're dismissing Trump's remarks, saying his policy outline is unclear. Helping in the fight against the Taliban is NATO. More than 12,000 troops from NATO and partner countries are helping train Afghan security forces. The organization's Secretary General says they support President Trump's new strategy and are committed to increasing troop levels in Afghanistan. Lauren?
There's one big question, and today did the media press Secretary Tillerson on the exact number of additional troops the U.S. will send to Afghanistan?
Yes, they did, Lauren. Secretary Tillerson was pressed multiple times today during this afternoon's press conference as to the exact level of additional troops the U.S. will send to Afghanistan, but he didn't budge. He did not want to give any range of troop levels here. And he says it's actually part of the strategy. He reiterated the fact that the Taliban is a very deceptive enemy that doesn't indicate when they're going to attack or with how many people. He says he wants to make sure the United States does the same. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee at the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. Defense Secretary James Mattis arrives in Baghdad hours after President Trump's speech on Afghanistan. During this unannounced visit, Mattis is meeting with senior Iraqi government leaders and U.S. commanders. The U.S. military and Iraqi forces reclaimed the city of Mosul last month. Iraqi troops have reached the first urban areas of the northern town of Tal Afar, where ISIS still has control. The city is less than 100 miles from the Syrian border. Officials expect heavier fighting as they push into the town's center. The U.S.-backed operation was launched on Sunday. The 4 alleged members of a terror cell accused of killing 15 people in and around Barcelona last week appear in court. At least one of the suspects testified today. The men were arrested last week for their alleged involvement in planning or carrying out vehicle attacks on pedestrians in Barcelona Thursday and in Cambrils early Friday. The last missing member of the cell was gunned down yesterday. ISIS claimed responsibility for both attacks. Chile's constitutional court upholds a measure allowing abortion when a woman's life is in danger. This reverses the country's absolute ban on the procedure. Conservative lawmakers arguing the move will be unconstitutional. Abortions have been banned in all circumstances since 1989. Dramatic video out of Italy after crews rescue a baby from the debris of a collapsed building. After an earthquake hit the island of Ischia, at least one person was killed, an elderly woman who was inside a collapsed church. Dozens of others were critically injured. Officials say the infant baby, as well as his 2 brothers, are in good condition. An archbishop in the Philippines is raising the alarm over a sharp spike in police killings by ringing some church bells. Bells will ring 15 minutes every night until November across an archdiocese north of Manila to protest drug and crime killings. More than 80 people were gunned down in just 3 days last week. President Duterte announced a crackdown on criminals last year, and since then, more than 3,200 suspects have been killed. The Vatican's Secretary of State, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, is in Russia right now. His goal, peace and strengthening ties between Catholics and the Russian Orthodox Church. Edward Penton, Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register, joins us. Hope you're doing well, Ed. What's been achieved so far during this visit?
Well, it's been very much quite a success so far. Cardinal Parolin has met basically the foreign minister for the Russian Orthodox Church, Metropolitan Hilarion, yesterday, and today he had a big meeting with Sergei Lavrov, who's the Russian foreign minister, and that seemed to go fairly well. I think they talked about improving relations and exchanges with regarding culture, medicine and science. They also signed an agreement to waive visa requirements for diplomatic personnel, so archbishops coming to Russia won't need visas anymore. So there's been some improvement there. Some sticking points as well, but I think that's generally it's been quite a success. Right,
Cardinal Parolin spoke positively of a possible trip by Pope Francis to Moscow. Is that really likely?
It seems to be. That wasn't supposed to be on the agenda, but he spoke today at a press conference about a positive momentum gathering for a visit. Certainly this visit helps pave the way for that, but he said there's still much to be done to secure that visit. Some say it could happen as early as next year, though.
And that would be groundbreaking, wouldn't it, for a pope to go to Russia?
Yes, it'd be the first time that a pope, certainly in the modern era, has ever gone to Russia. As we know, last year was the first time since the Great Schism of 1054 that a pope had met the Patriarch Kirill of Moscow. So it would be a very historic event, yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us, Edward Penton, Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register.
Thanks, Lauren.
As South Korean President Moon Jae-in asks the Vatican to help establish peace on the Korean Peninsula, the president of the Catholic Bishops' Conference of Korea speaks to our National Catholic Register. Archbishop Kim Hee-jung tells the Register, "I think Pope Francis can help to promote authentic peace talks for the Korean Peninsula, which would contribute to peace for Northeast Asia and world peace by moving away from national interest." About 10% of South Korea's 52 million residents are Catholic. You can read more about the interview right now at ncregister.com. And coming up, an update on the health of House Majority Whip Steve Scalise. Plus, we'll discuss President Trump's Afghanistan plan. Other news of the day with the Washington Examiner's Philip Wegman. A Catholic priest in Virginia is taking a leave of absence after disclosing he once burned crosses as a member of the Ku Klux Klan. Father William Aitchison, a priest in the Diocese of Arlington, described his story in a newspaper column. In a statement, Arlington's Bishop Michael Burbidge called Aitchison's past with the Klan troubling, but said he hopes his story of transformation will help others. House Majority Whip Steve Scalise tells Republicans during a conference call he's continuing to recover. Scalise remains in rehab after being shot during a congressional baseball practice in Virginia in June. House Speaker Paul Ryan says members were quite relieved to hear his voice. And Navy divers find the remains of some of the 10 sailors missing after a collision yesterday between the USS McCain and an oil tanker. 5 sailors were injured after the collision Monday near Singapore and Malaysia. It was the second major collision in 2 months involving the Pacific-based 7th Fleet. And the Navy has ordered a broad investigation into its performance and readiness. There are roughly 8,400 troops in Afghanistan. During the peak of the war between 2010 and 11, the U.S. had roughly 100,000 troops. Although President Trump says he won't talk about the number, there are hints he is going to embrace the Pentagon's proposal to boost troop numbers by nearly 4,000. To break down the president's speech from last night, we're joined by Philip Wegman, commentary writer for the Washington Examiner. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Washington Examiner published a piece by the Joint Collective Editorial Team saying Trump's mission in Afghanistan lacks a mission.
Well, that's right. You can break down yesterday's speech about the forgotten war in Afghanistan to really 3 parts. First, as far as the tactics are concerned, he's going to be turning that over to the generals, not politicians here in D.C. As far as the strategy is concerned, we're left with an understanding that it's to kill terrorists. And then finally, the mission is unclear because there's no definition of what victory actually looks like.
But there's no definition of what victory looks like with ISIS, period.
And that's what's really dogged the United States in Afghanistan for all of these 16 years. We took Kabul very early on. This is not a conventional war. This requires the president to articulate a new mission, something that is going to be up to date for the current war on terror.
He said in his speech, quote, "My original instinct was to pull out." And why did he change his mind? I don't know if you know that, but do you think America is going to be able to win the war by adding more troops?
Well, what I think this shows is that President Trump is nothing if not pragmatic on the world stage. And while he opposed the war earlier on as a politician, now that he's actually looked at what's going on the ground, he's made this decision to increase troop levels. Whether or not this is going to be successful in the long run, that's unclear. But something to keep in mind is that before the 2020 re-election, unless there's a major breakthrough in Afghanistan, chances are good that there will be troops on the ground. An 18 or a 19-year-old soldier who wasn't even alive the day the September 11th attacks occurred.
Let's switch topics. Yesterday, Congressman Diane Black, a Republican of Tennessee, who's also the Budget Committee chairman, stopped by the Washington Examiner.
Yes, ma'am.
to meet with the board. What did she have to say about the looming debt ceiling?
Well, this is one of the charades that always happens in September. You have to raise the debt ceiling. You have to make certain that the government is still funded. But she's warning the White House. She says right now, look, we have control of both houses of Congress, and we also have the White House. If we're going to increase this debt ceiling, we might as well have some reforms or some spending cuts in order to necessitate this. And I think that's a strong message coming out of one of the most senior members of House leadership right now.
She said something similar here on News Nightly earlier on, and the point being, it's going to be tough to do what she wants to do. I think you would agree.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you so much, Philip Wegman from the Washington Examiner.
Thank you for having me.
Up next, while the amount of ordinations are rising, will it be enough to replace the aging population of priests? We'll break down the findings of a new study. The church honors the queenship of Mary. It takes place today, a week after the Assumption of Mary. Pope Pius XII established the feast in 1954, but references to Mary's queenship go all the way back to the scriptures. Close to 600 men were ordained priests this year across the United States. That's according to a new study out of the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate, also known as CARA, based at Georgetown University. The number of priests in recent years remains steady, but it's not enough to keep up with the demands of parishes across the country. In 1965, there were about 38,000 diocesan priests. Today, 26,000. Joining us now is Mary Gauthier, a senior research associate at the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate. That's at Georgetown University. You did this study. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. You specialize in Catholic demographic trends in the U.S. So the numbers in this study show a steady rate of ordained priests, but there are still not enough. What's happening?
Well, what's happening is we've got a steady supply, have had for the last 20 years, but it's only about a third to a half as many as we would need to compensate for the larger numbers of priests that are dying and retiring now because they entered the priesthood 40, 50 years ago.
What about the number of Catholics in the United States? Is that also a factor?
The number of Catholics continues to grow at 1% per year approximately. So we've got a lot more Catholics.
More demand, less supply, and retiring priests. Let's look at some other information that your study reveals. 70% of newly ordained priests are white, 14% Hispanic, 10% Asian Pacific Islander, 4% Black or African American, and 2% other. Does that reflect the Catholic Church in America?
It reflects the diversity of our Catholic population today, which is far more diverse than it was when the priests of 50 years ago were ordained. That's why the priesthood looks a lot more like the elderly Catholic population, while the younger priests look a lot more like Catholics today.
Your study says 4 in 5 priests were encouraged to consider their vocation by someone, most often a parish priest or a friend or another parishioner. I've tried with my son. It's not happening. What can we do to encourage more young men to join the priesthood?
Well, encouragement is important. In fact, the same study shows that these priests reported that on average they were encouraged by 4 different people to consider the priesthood. So the best thing we can do is if you see someone in your parish who you think would be a good priest, don't be quiet about that.
Don't be shy.
Speak up.
Right. My cousin, who lives in Ave Maria, Florida, has a little mini altar for her 3- and 4-year-old sons, and they practice. They have an uncle who's a priest, and they are already learning about the altar and all that goes on with it. So I'm thinking maybe that's a way, and that could be we could have a priest right there.
And another important motivator is knowing someone who's a priest or a religious. More than a third of these men had someone as a friend who's a priest or a religious. So invite them into your home. Help them to get to know your children.
That's a wonderful idea, too. Thank you so much for joining us. Mary Gauthier, Senior Research Associate at the Center for Applied Research here in town at Georgetown University.
Thank you.
The Vatican releases the official logos and mottos for the Holy Father's journey to Chile and Peru. The Pope's trip to Chile will take place January 15th to 18th in 2018. The motto is "My peace I give you," taken from the Gospel of John. From Chile, Pope Francis will stop in Peru from the 18th of January to the 21st. The motto for that visit is "United for Hope." Francis becomes the second pope to visit Peru after Pope St. John Paul II in 1985 and again in 1988. That does it for all of us here at EWTN News Nightly. To all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn, and we will be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless you.